Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, not to the grand castles of medieval knights, but to the grimy, bustling, and often merciless streets of Victorian era industrial cities, places like Manchester, England, or Lowell, Massachusetts. We're going to talk about a group of individuals whose childhoods were brutally stolen, their innocence traded for labor, the Victorian Child Worker. You might picture quaint, sepia toned images of children in period dress, perhaps playing with hoops or sitting in a classroom. But for millions, especially in the burgeoning industrial centers, life was an unforgiving cycle of toil, danger, and deprivation. You'll quickly realize that if you were a child in their shoes, you probably wouldn't have survived the week, let alone made it to adulthood. Forget your comfy beds, your nutritious snacks, your easy access to clean water and medicine. This was a world where a 5-year-old could be a full time employee, where a splinter could kill you, and where the air itself was a toxic cocktail. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake, not to the gentle chime of an alarm or the sunlight filtering through clean curtains, but to the harsh, insistent clang of a factory bell cutting through the pre dawn darkness. It's still hours before the sun fully rises, and the air outside your cramped, shared room in a squalid tenement is already thick with the acrid smell of coal smoke and industrial waste. This is your reality, a young child, perhaps no older than 8, maybe even 5 or 6. Your small, aching body protests against the cold, damp morning, every joint stiff from the previous day's relentless labor. There's no leisurely breakfast waiting for you, no warm milk or sugary cereal. Instead, you quickly scarf down a meager piece of stale bread. Perhaps a watery gruel if you're lucky, your stomach already churning with a familiar dread. This isn't a sleepy morning, it's the brutal, unceremonious start to another soul crushing day. Your bedroom, if you can even call it that, is likely a shared space in a tenement building, often with multiple families crammed into single rooms. Privacy is an alien concept. The air is heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies, damp clothes, and the lingering scent of inadequate sanitation. You might share a single, lumpy straw mattress with several siblings, or even other unrelated children, all of you restless, coughing, and prone to the various infestations that thrive in such close, unsanitary quarters. Sleep is rarely deep or restorative, constantly broken by the sounds of the bustling, often violent, streets outside, or the cries of other weary residents. This constant state of semi exhaustion is your baseline, a perpetual weariness that settles deep into your bones before you even begin your working day. As you stumble out into the Dickensian street, the fog, mixed with industrial smog, bites at your lungs. The cobblestones are slick with grime and waste, and the narrow alleyways are choked with the refuse of a burgeoning industrial society. You see other children, barely visible shapes in the gloom, already hurrying towards their own places of toil. Their faces are pale, gaunt, and etched with a weariness that belies their tender years. Their clothes, if they are lucky enough to have shoes, are threadbare and patched, offering scant protection against the biting cold or the damp chill that permeates everything. This isn't a neighborhood full of laughter and childish games. It's a silent, somber procession of tiny figures, each dragging their feet towards another day of endless labor. Your journey to the factory, or mill, or mine, is itself a gauntlet. The streets are dangerous, filled with horse drawn carts, rushing pedestrians, and the constant threat of accidents. You navigate treacherous crossings, avoid piles of refuse, and breathe air that would be deemed hazardous by any modern standard. The polluted fog, a common feature of these industrial cities, clings to everything, coating your lungs with a layer of grime that will never truly clear. This daily commute, seemingly simple, is another drain on your already depleted energy reserves, a silent testament to the sheer physical endurance required just to exist. Historians still debate the exact long term respiratory effects on these children, but the evidence points to widespread, chronic lung conditions. Finally, you reach the monstrous edifice of the factory. Its towering brick walls loom over you, belching smoke from countless chimneys, its windows dark and uninviting. The rhythmic, deafening clang and hiss of the machinery inside sends vibrations through the very ground. This isn't a place of learning or play, it's a brutal, unforgiving environment designed for production, not for human well being, least of all for children. The air inside is even worse than outside, thick with cotton dust, coal dust, or the metallic tang of machinery, constantly irritating your eyes, nose, and throat. The sheer noise is overwhelming, a constant roar of gears, looms, and steam engines that makes communication difficult and slowly, inexorably, damages your hearing. Inside, the foremen are already barking orders, their voices harsh and impatient. There's no time for delay, no room for error. Your job, whether it's piecing broken threads on a spinning machine, crawling under active looms to retrieve fallen bobbins, or sweeping up cotton dust, is relentless. The machinery is unforgiving. It doesn't care if you're tired, if your fingers ache, or if you're sick. It demands constant attention, constant motion. One slip, one moment of distraction, and your hand could be caught in the gears, your hair tangled in a spinning shaft, or your small body crushed by a moving part. Safety precautions are virtually non existent. The factory floor is a labyrinth of unguarded machinery, slick with oil and grease, poorly lit, and constantly vibrating. The dangers are not abstract, they are tangible, ever present threats to your limbs, your health, and your very life. The hours stretch on, an interminable blur of repetitive tasks. The concept of a workday for a child often meant 12, 14, or even 16 hours, 6 days a week. There are no breaks for play, no opportunities for education, no moments of respite beyond a brief, meager meal break. Your body screams in protest, your eyes burn with fatigue, and your mind drifts into a haze of exhaustion. The relentless pace, the constant noise, the suffocating atmosphere, it grinds you down, stripping away your youthful energy and replacing it with a profound, bone deep weariness. This isn't just physical labor, it's a psychological assault, robbing you of the fundamental right to be a child. Every minute feels like an hour, every hour an eternity, as you yearn for the distant promise of sleep. And that sleep, when it finally comes, is often disturbed by nightmares of the machinery, by the screams of injured children you've witnessed, or simply by the constant aches and pains of your overtaxed body. You're not just tired, you're utterly depleted. Your young spirit struggling to cope with a life designed for adults. And even then, a life of profound hardship. The bedtime story for you is the harsh reality of your own exhaustion. The only true comfort, the brief oblivion of unconsciousness before the factory bell calls you back to the grind once more. You exist in a cycle of dawn to dusk labor, punctuated only by fleeting, unsatisfying sleep. Your childhood a ghost, haunting the edges of your waking nightmare. Last night, we barely touched on the brutal dawn and the overwhelming, deafening, and perpetually dangerous reality inside the Victorian factory walls. Tonight, let's descend deeper into the heart of this industrial nightmare, exploring the specific perils that child workers faced every single minute, and the insidious ways the machinery literally reshaped their young bodies. because while you might imagine a relatively safe, albeit tedious, job, the truth was a constant dance with disfigurement, injury, and death. You're a child, perhaps 7 years old, working in a textile mill. Your job is a scavenger, meaning you crawl underneath the whirring, clanking, massive spinning machines to collect loose cotton and lint. Imagine this for a moment. These machines are enormous, hot, and move with a terrifying speed. Their gears and belts exposed. The space beneath them is cramped, dusty, and barely lit. You are lying on your stomach, your small body navigating a labyrinth of moving parts. The deafening roar of the machinery vibrating through your very bones. One loose thread, one moment of clumsiness, or one ill-timed lurch of the machine, and your hair could be caught, your fingers crushed, or your tiny limbs mangled beyond recognition. There are no emergency stops, no safety guards. The machine simply keeps running, its hunger for production far outweighing any concern for your fragile well-being. This isn't just dangerous, it's a terrifying, claustrophobic ballet with death. If you're not a scavenger, perhaps you're a piecer, responsible for joining broken threads on a spinning frame. This requires incredible dexterity and constant attention. The threads break frequently, and you must quickly, precisely, retie them as the machine continues its relentless work. Your fingers, constantly exposed to the fast-moving threads and small components, are perpetually raw, cut, and often bleeding. The cotton dust, fine and insidious, fills the air, coating your lungs with every shallow breath. This dust, mixed with bits of fiber and industrial pollutants, would lead to a chronic, debilitating lung disease known as byssinosis or brown lung, a slow, agonizing suffocation that would plague textile workers for their entire lives, if they lived long enough. Imagine coughing constantly, your chest tight, your breath wheezing, all before you've even reached puberty. And it wasn't just textiles. Imagine working in a match factory. Your fingers, raw from chemicals, would be constantly dipping wooden splints into vats of white phosphorus, a substance that glowed eerily in the dark. While it made for a striking visual, it also caused a horrific condition known as jaw. This was a painful, disfiguring necrosis of the jawbone, where the bone would literally rot away, leading to severe pain, swelling, disfigurement, and often a slow, agonizing death. The constant exposure to the toxic fumes meant that even if your jaw didn't rot, your general health would rapidly deteriorate, leaving you pale, sickly, and prone to other ailments. The irony is, these matches brought light to many homes, while simultaneously casting a dark shadow over the lives of the children who made them. Or consider the sheer monotony and physical strain that distorted young bodies. Factory work involved endless hours of repetitive motion, often in unnatural postures. Children working at looms might stand for 12-14 hours a day, their small spines curving under the strain, their legs swelling from constant pressure. Others might perform the same hand motions thousands of times, leading to joint deformities, muscle strains, and chronic pain. The constant noise and vibration from machinery didn't just damage hearing, it contributed to a pervasive sense of agitation and nervous exhaustion. You wouldn't just be tired, your very bones and muscles would be subtly, agonizingly, reshaping themselves to accommodate the unnatural demands of the factory, leaving you with permanent disabilities and a lifetime of chronic discomfort. Academics still debate the precise prevalence of specific occupational deformities, but the widespread skeletal and muscular issues among adult factory workers certainly had their roots in childhood labor. Beyond the machinery, the environment itself was hostile. Lighting was often poor, relying on gas lamps that produced their own fumes, or simply natural light from grimy windows. making it difficult to see intricate work and increasing the risk of accidents. Sanitation facilities, if they existed at all, were rudimentary and often filthy, contributing to the spread of disease among the closely packed workers. The air was perpetually thick with dust, fibers, and chemical fumes, each breath a silent assault on your young, developing lungs. There was no concept of ventilation beyond opening a window, and even then, the outside air of an industrial city was hardly pristine. The pace of work was dictated by the machines, not by human endurance. You couldn't slow down, couldn't take a moment to rest if you felt faint. The foreman's whip, or the threat of dismissal and starvation for your family, kept you moving. Fear was a constant motivator, a cold hand on your back pushing you forward even when your body screamed for respite. This constant pressure, this relentless drive to keep up with the unfeeling machinery, created an atmosphere of pervasive anxiety and stress, stripping away any sense of childhood wonder and replacing it with a grim determination to survive another shift. And let's not forget the sheer injustice of it all. You are a child, dependent, vulnerable, yet you are treated as a disposable cog in a vast industrial machine. Your youth, your innocence, your potential, all are sacrificed on the altar of production. There's no empathy from the owners, no real protection from the law. The prevailing mindset is that child labor is a necessary evil or even a positive good, instilling discipline and preventing idleness. This dehumanization, this stripping away of your inherent worth, would leave deep psychological scars, fostering a sense of hopelessness and a profound understanding of your own powerlessness in a world that saw you merely as cheap labor. The very concept of childhood as a protected, nurturing phase of life simply did not exist for millions. Finally, consider the long-term impact. Even if you survive the immediate dangers of the factory floor, your body would be permanently marked. Stunted growth, bowed legs, curved spines, missing fingers, chronic coughs, and damaged hearing were common legacies of factory work. Your life expectancy would be significantly reduced, and your adult years would be plagued by the ailments acquired in childhood. There was no real retirement, no pension plan for a child worker. If you could no longer work due to age, injury, or illness, you faced the grim prospect of the workhouse or the streets, a final, chilling testament to a life consumed by the relentless, unforgiving machinery of the industrial age. The factory, which seemed to offer a path to survival, often delivered a slow, agonizing demise, trading a brief, brutal childhood for a truncated, painful adulthood. Last night, we bravely navigated the deafening chaos and brutal dangers of the Victorian factory floor, witnessing how the relentless machinery literally consumed childhoods. Tonight, let's descend into an even darker, more claustrophobic realm of child labor, the coal mines. Because if you thought the air in the mills was bad, imagine a world of perpetual darkness, crushing depths, and dangers that even the light of day couldn't penetrate. You're a child, perhaps barely old enough to walk upright, maybe 5 or 6, definitely no older than 10. Your alarm isn't a bell, but a rough shake from an elder sibling or parent in the pre-dawn gloom of your tiny, often dirt-floored cottage. The air is already cold, damp, and smells of stale coal smoke. There's no breakfast, or if there is, it's a sliver of dry bread, quickly swallowed to quell the gnawing hunger. Your clothes are thin, ragged, offering little protection against the chill that perpetually clings to the ground. A chill that deepens as you approach the mine shaft. The journey to the mine is a silent, grim procession. You walk with other children, their faces smudged with yesterday's coal dust, their eyes wide with a mixture of fatigue and apprehension. The landscape around you is bleak slag heaps, towering structures of industrial waste, scar the horizon, and the air is perpetually thick with the smell of sulfur and damp earth. You reach the mine entrance, a gaping maw in the earth, belching cold, damp air that smells of rock, coal, and something indefinably dank. The light from the surface begins to fade, replaced by the flickering, weak glow of a single candle, or perhaps no light at all if your family can't afford even that. Then comes the descent. You might be lowered down the shaft in a crude cage, often with several other people, swaying precariously as the daylight quickly recedes above you. Or, perhaps even worse, you might have to climb down long, rickety ladders, your small hands gripping the wet, splintery rungs, your heart pounding with every dizzying drop into the blackness. The air grows heavier, colder, and fills with the metallic tang of damp rock and the subtle, dangerous scent of methane gas. The pressure on your ears builds, and the sounds of the surface world disappear, replaced by the drip of water, the scuttling of unseen creatures, and the increasingly distant echoes of your own labored breathing. Once below, you're immediately thrust into a world of oppressive darkness. Your job might be that of a trapper boy or trapper girl. This means you spend hours, sometimes as many as 16 hours, sitting alone in absolute darkness, behind a ventilation door, deep within the mine. Your only task is to open the door when you hear the coal wagons approaching, then close it again, ensuring the air circulation for the miners working deeper inside. Imagine the profound isolation. No light, no sound save for the occasional rat scurrying by or the distant rumble of carts. Your young mind would be left to its own devices, battling fear, loneliness, and the creeping madness of total sensory deprivation. The cold, damp air would seep into your bones, and your muscles would cramp from the endless sitting. For a modern child, the thought of even a few minutes alone in absolute darkness is terrifying. For these children, it was their entire workday. If you weren't a trapper, perhaps you were a hurrier or thruster. This was an even more physically demanding and dangerous job. As a hurrier, you'd pull carts of coal through incredibly narrow, low tunnels, often on your hands and knees, with a chain attached to a belt around your waist. The tunnels were so low that adults couldn't stand upright, forcing children to perform this grueling labor. As a thruster, you'd push from behind. Imagine pulling or pushing hundreds of pounds of coal for miles in near darkness, through tunnels barely wider than your body. Your knees and elbows would be raw and bleeding, your back constantly aching, and your lungs burning from the exertion and the dust-filled air. The physical deformities from this work, bowed legs, curved spines, stunted growth, were incredibly common, a permanent mark of their arduous existence and the dangers. The coal mine was a death trap. Explosions from methane gas were a constant, terrifying threat. One spark from a pickaxe, one ill-placed candle, and the entire tunnel could erupt in a fiery blast, incinerating everyone in its path. Flooding was another ever-present danger, as underground rivers or unexpected water pockets could burst through, drowning workers in an instant. Cave-ins, known as falls of roof, were common, as the unstable rock and coal above could collapse without warning, burying workers alive. You lived every moment knowing that the ground above you and the air around you could become your tomb at any second. There were no safety protocols, no seismic monitors, no emergency oxygen. You relied on luck and the grim knowledge that a misstep could mean instant death. This pervasive fear, this constant awareness of imminent catastrophe, would weigh heavily on your young mind, eroding any sense of safety or security. Historians still uncover new details about the immense death toll in Victorian mines, a silent testament to the extreme conditions. The air quality in the mines was horrific. Coal dust, fine and black, permeated everything. It coated your skin, filled your nostril, and, most dangerously, clogged your lungs. Over time, this led to black lung, a slow, progressive, and incurable disease that choked the life out of miners, leaving them gasping for breath and susceptible to other respiratory illnesses like tuberculosis. Imagine your lungs, tiny and still developing, constantly battling against this suffocating enemy. Your cough becoming a permanent fixture, your breath growing shallower with each passing year. The darkness, the damp, the cold, the suffocating dust, it all combined to create an environment that systematically broke down the human body, especially the fragile bodies of children. Even the most basic needs were neglected. Meals, if any, were eaten quickly in the darkness, often just a piece of bread and cheese, shared with rats and other vermin. Water was scarce and often contaminated. There were no proper facilities, no clean places to rest. Your body was in a constant state of dehydration and malnourishment, further weakening you against the relentless physical demands and the ever present threat of disease. The lack of sunlight, day in and day out, led to vitamin D deficiencies, contributing to bone deformities like rickets. You were quite literally starved of light, both physically and metaphorically. The mine was a place of utter dehumanization. You weren't seen as a child with potential, but as a unit of labor, easily replaceable. Your life had little value beyond the coal you helped extract. The foremen were harsh, often brutal, enforcing discipline with whips and threats. There was no compassion, no understanding of your age or your struggles. This constant abuse, both physical and psychological, would strip away your sense of self-worth, leaving you feeling like little more than an animal, forced to toil in the dark for mere survival. The echoes of whips, the shouts, and the despair would fill your ears long after you left the mine, if you ever did. And what about the long-term prognosis? Even if you survived the dangers of explosions, cave-ins, and gas poisoning, your future was bleak. Your body, twisted and stunted by the work, would be prone to chronic pain and debilitating illnesses. Your lungs, ravaged by coal dust, would slowly betray you, leading to an early, agonizing death. Your mind, haunted by the isolation and fear, would be forever scarred. There was no escape, no upward mobility. You were born into the mine, and you would likely die in, or because of the mine. Your short, brutal life, consumed by the insatiable hunger of the Industrial Revolution. The coal that fueled the burgeoning cities and industries of the Victorian era was quite literally powered by the stolen childhoods and broken bodies of countless children, buried alive in the suffocating darkness. Last night, we descended into the terrifying, suffocating darkness of the Victorian coal mines, witnessing the brutal existence of child miners. Tonight, let's emerge from the earth, only to find ourselves navigating another equally treacherous landscape, the bustling, dirty, and often merciless streets of Victorian cities, where countless children toiled in plain sight, their survival a daily gamble against poverty, hunger, and an indifferent public. Because while factories and mines often hid their child labor, the streets exposed it, raw and unrelenting. You're a child, perhaps 7 or 10 years old, with no factory bell to wake you, only the biting cold of the dawn and the gnawing hunger in your stomach. Your home might be a crowded lodging house, a filthy alleyway, or even just a discarded packing crate. There's no warm bed, no protective roof, just the harsh reality of exposure. As the city slowly wakes, you join the throng of other street children, a desperate army of tiny entrepreneurs, each vying for a meager crust of bread. The air is thick with the pervasive smell of horse manure, coal smoke, stagnant water, and the indescribable stench of human and animal waste. This isn't the romanticized image of London. It's a living, breathing cesspool, and you are just another struggling organism within it. Your particular trade on the streets could be anything. Perhaps you're a crossing sweeper, a child with a broom, standing at a busy intersection. Your job to sweep the horse manure and mud out of the way for wealthy pedestrians, hoping they'll toss you a penny or a halfpenny in return. Imagine standing there for hours, in all weathers, scorching sun, driving rain, biting wind, inhaling the dust and filth kicked up by carriages, your eyes constantly scanning for potential customers. You're an obstacle, a nuisance to most, ignored or shooed away, your small hand perpetually outstretched, hoping for a sliver of charity. The competition is fierce. Other children, often older and stronger, will try to muscle in on your patch, leading to desperate skirmishes over a few precious coins. Or maybe you're a match seller, wandering the crowded streets, your voice hoarse from shouting, "Matches! Sir Matches!" You carry a small tray of penny boxes, your only hope of earning enough to buy a bite to eat. You learn quickly how to spot a potential customer, how to endure endless rejections, and how to avoid the local bullies who might try to steal your meager earnings. The dangers are constant. You could be run over by a carriage, robbed by older children or desperate adults, or simply collapse from exhaustion. Your feet ache, your throat burns, and your hopes dwindle with every unsold box. Perhaps you're a rag picker or bone grubber, haunting the city's overflowing dust heaps and rubbish piles. This is the truly grim side of street life. You sift through mountains of putrid waste, your bare hands plunging into rotting food, broken glass, and unimaginable filth, searching for anything of value: a scrap of metal, a discarded bone, a piece of cloth. The stench is overwhelming, a dizzying cocktail of decay and disease. You're constantly exposed to infection, to cuts from sharp objects, and to the rats and vermin that swarm these heaps. This isn't just unpleasant, it's profoundly dehumanizing, forcing you to literally wallow in the refuse of society, deemed even less valuable than the trash you seek to reclaim. Historians often highlight the incredibly low social status of these scavenging children, reflecting society's abandonment of them. If you were a girl, you might find yourself as a flower seller, your small basket of wilting blooms offering a fleeting moment of beauty amidst the squalor. But even this seemingly innocent trade comes with its dangers. You're vulnerable to harassment, to theft, and to the crushing disappointment of unsold wares. Or perhaps you're simply a beggar, your voice barely a whisper, your eyes pleading, a small, pathetic figure swallowed by the indifference of the bustling crowds. This constant exposure to public scorn, to the coldness of passers-by, would harden your spirit, teaching you early on that survival depended solely on your own wits and desperation. The sheer physical toll of street work was immense. You walked miles every day, often barefoot on cold, hard cobblestones. You were perpetually hungry, your energy levels dangerously low, making you susceptible to illness and injury. Exposure to the elements was constant shivering in the rain, sweltering in the summer heat, or enduring the biting winds of winter with only threadbare clothes. Your feet would be a mass of blisters and sores, your skin chapped and cracked, and your body perpetually cold and damp. Illnesses like pneumonia, bronchitis, and tuberculosis were rampant, often exacerbated by malnutrition and constant exposure. A simple cold could quickly escalate into a life-threatening condition for a child with no access to medicine or warmth. And then there's the constant danger of violence and exploitation. The streets were a brutal ecosystem. Older, stronger boys might prey on younger, weaker ones, stealing their meager earnings. Desperate adults might target you. And for girls, the threat of sexual exploitation was a chilling reality, often a desperate path to avoid starvation. There was no one to protect you, no one to advocate for your rights. The police, if they cared at all, were more likely to see you as a nuisance than a victim. You learned to be invisible when necessary, to be quick on your feet, and to trust no one. The street, which offered a desperate kind of freedom from the factory, also demanded an even greater vigilance and a profound understanding of its cruel, unforgiving rules. Academics have detailed the extensive networks of petty crime and exploitation that street children were forced into, often as a matter of pure survival. The lack of education was almost absolute. For a street child, every waking moment was dedicated to survival. There was no time for school, no money for books, no energy for learning. You learned the harsh lessons of the street: how to beg effectively, how to evade police, how to find scraps of food, and how to survive another day. Your literacy was likely non existent, and your understanding of the wider world was limited to the confines of your immediate struggle. This intellectual deprivation meant that escape from the cycle of poverty was incredibly difficult. You were trapped by circumstance, your potential for a different life stifled before it could even begin. Finally, consider the psychological impact of utter neglect and indifference. You are alone in the vast, uncaring metropolis. Your parents might be dead, too ill to work, or simply unable to provide for you. Society, for the most part, looks through you, steps over you, or actively shuns you. You are a ghost, a shadow flitting through the bustling street. Your existence a silent testament to the failures of a society that consumed its children. This profound sense of abandonment, of being utterly alone in a hostile world, would leave deep, lasting scars on your young mind. Hope, if it existed at all, was a fragile, fleeting thing, constantly threatened by the grim realities of your daily life. The street, for all its dangers, was also your teacher, your provider, and your relentless taskmaster, shaping you into a hardened survivor or crushing you beneath its unforgiving heel. Last night, we braved the raw, unyielding streets where Victorian children fought for every penny and every scrap. Tonight, let's pull back the velvet curtains and step into a seemingly more respectable, yet often equally harsh, arena of child labor, the Victorian domestic service. Because while the street might promise a brutal freedom and the factory a deafening cage, the home often offered a subtle, insidious form of servitude, cloaked in the guise of opportunity. You are a child, perhaps barely 10 years old, handed over by your struggling parents or orphaned, deemed useful enough to earn your keep in someone else's house. This isn't the cheerful, bustling image of a modern home. It's a stratified, often cold, and demanding environment. Your new home might be a grand townhouse in London, a sprawling country estate, or a more modest, but still strict, middle class dwelling in a city like Boston or Philadelphia. No matter the size, your place is at the very bottom of its rigid hierarchy, often outranked even by the family dog. Your days begin, much like your factory counterparts, long before dawn. You're likely a scullery maid or a boot boy, positions reserved for the youngest and most junior servants. Your first task might be to light the fires in all the grates, a cold, smoky, and often dangerous job in the dim, unheated rooms. Imagine carefully stacking kindling, coaxing embers, and constantly battling the smoke that burns your eyes and chokes your lungs. You then carry heavy buckets of coal up countless flights of stairs, your small arms aching, your clothes quickly smudged with soot. This isn't just a chore, it's a relentless, physically taxing start to an already exhausting day. Your bedroom is probably a tiny, unheated attic space, perhaps a shared cot in the servants' quarters, or even a straw pallet on the kitchen floor. There's no comfort, no privacy, and very little warmth. You share the space with the pervasive odors of the house, cooking smells, stale air, and the faint scent of the unwashed. Your sleep is light, easily broken by the sounds of the household stirring or the persistent cold that seeps into your bones. This continuous lack of restful sleep contributes to your perpetual exhaustion, leaving you prone to accidents and mistakes, which, in turn, lead to harsh reprimands. Your duties are endless and mind-numbingly repetitive. As a scullery maid, you spend hours in the damp, dimly lit scullery, washing endless piles of greasy dishes and pots in cold or lukewarm water, your hands constantly chapped and raw from the harsh soap and the cold. You scrub floors on your hands and knees, polish endless pieces of silver and brass until your arms ache, and empty slop buckets and chamber pots, the stench often overwhelming. This isn't a tidy, efficient modern kitchen. It's a hot, steamy, grimy space, teeming with flies and the constant threat of scalding water or broken crockery. If you're a boot boy, your day is equally repetitive, polishing dozens of boots and shoes until they gleam, fetching and carrying messages, running errands in all weather. You are always on call, constantly anticipating the next command, never truly able to relax. Your life is not your own. It is entirely dictated by the demands and schedules of the family you serve. There are no fixed hours, no concept of overtime. You work until the work is done, which often means late into the night. The lack of personal freedom is profound. You are always under observation, always expected to be quiet, deferential, and invisible. You cannot leave the house without permission. You have no say in your meals, and your social interactions are strictly limited to other servants, if at all. Your letters might even be read by the mistress of the house to ensure you're not complaining or forming inappropriate connections. This constant surveillance, this complete lack of autonomy, would be psychologically stifling, stripping you of your identity and replacing it with your role as a nameless, faceless servant. And the threat of abuse is ever present. While not every household was cruel, many masters and mistresses, particularly those of lower social standing, who felt the need to assert their authority, could be incredibly harsh. A spilled tray, a chipped plate, or a moment of perceived laziness could result in a verbal dressing down, a slap, or even dismissal. Dismissal, for a child servant, meant instant destitution, forcing you onto the merciless streets. The constant fear of making a mistake, of incurring the wrath of your employers, would create an atmosphere of intense anxiety, keeping you perpetually on edge and utterly terrified of displeasing those who held your entire existence in their hands. Historians often struggle to quantify domestic abuse, but countless personal accounts detail the harsh treatment of child servants. Consider the isolation. While living in a house full of people, you are often incredibly lonely. You are not part of the family, and your interactions with them are purely transactional. You might form bonds with other servants, but even those relationships are strained by competition, exhaustion, and the rigid hierarchy of the household. There is no one to confide in, no one to truly protect you, and very little opportunity for genuine companionship. This profound emotional isolation, combined with the physical drudgery, would leave a child with a deep sense of abandonment and a profound yearning for connection that would rarely be fulfilled. The lack of education is another crushing blow. Like the factory and street children, you have no access to schooling. Your learning is limited to the practical skills of domestic service. You will likely remain illiterate or semi-literate, trapping you in a cycle of low-wage labor for your entire life. Your mind, like your body, is stunted, denied the opportunity to grow, explore, and imagine a different future. The only knowledge you gain is how to clean, how to serve, and how to survive in a system that views you as a permanent underclass. Finally, think about the stolen childhood. While other children played with dolls or toys, learned to read, or simply explored the world, you spent your formative years scrubbing, polishing, and serving. The laughter, the innocence, the boundless energy of youth were systematically drained from you, replaced by a premature maturity born of hardship. There were no joyful holidays, no birthday celebrations, no moments of pure, unadulterated play. Your childhood was a ghost, a fleeting dream you never truly lived, replaced by the grim realities of endless, thankless labor, a chilling testament to the unseen suffering within the seemingly respectable Victorian home. The grandeur of the Victorian era, as depicted in art and literature, was often built upon the tireless, unseen labor of these forgotten, exploited children. Last night, we quietly opened the doors to Victorian homes, revealing the unseen, often lonely, toil of child domestic servants. Tonight, let's turn our attention to the most basic human need, one that was constantly denied or barely met for millions of child workers' food and nourishment. Because while you might take regular, wholesome meals for granted, for these children, every bite was a battle, and hunger was a constant, gnawing companion. You wake, your stomach a hollow ache, a familiar sensation, the meager meal from yesterday, perhaps a crust of stale bread or a watery bowl of gruel, has long since been digested, leaving you with a profound, pervasive emptiness. This isn't just a fleeting hunger pang, it's a chronic state of malnutrition, a deep-seated deficiency that impacts every cell of your developing body. Your energy levels are perpetually low, your mind foggy, and your body struggles to fight off even minor ailments. This constant deficit fundamentally shaped their daily existence, turning every task into an arduous feat. Imagine your breakfast. If you were a factory or mine worker, it might be a hurried bite of dry bread, perhaps dipped in weak tea or a thin, insipid porridge. For domestic servants, it might be the cold leftovers from the family's previous night's meal, if there were any, often picked over and unappetizing. There were no vitamin-rich fruits, no fresh vegetables out of season, no protein-packed eggs or dairy products readily available. Your diet was monotonous, largely carbohydrate-based, and critically lacking in essential nutrients. You ate what you could get, quickly, before the long hours of labor began. And throughout the long, brutal workday, meals were scarce and short. In factories, a brief pause might allow you to eat a small, packed lunch. Again, likely more dry bread, perhaps a piece of hard cheese or a cold potato. There were no cafeterias, no clean eating areas. You'd sit on the dusty, vibrating floor or a crude bench, quickly shoveling food into your mouth before the foreman's whistle signaled the resumption of work. For street children, every meal was earned, a direct result of their daily toil. A few pennies might buy a piece of cheap, greasy fried fish or a small, often stale, pie from a street vendor. This food, while providing immediate calories, was often unhygienic, cooked in rancid fat, and carried its own risks of food poisoning. Consider the quality and safety of the food. Without refrigeration, food spoiled quickly. Meat, if available, was often cured with heavy amounts of salt or smoked, drastically altering its texture and flavor and making it difficult to digest. Grains, the staple of most diets, could be contaminated with mold or pests. Water was often drawn from contaminated wells or rivers, leading to rampant diarrheal diseases that further depleted already malnourished bodies. Imagine the constant threat of stomach upset, the debilitating cramps, and the relentless cycle of dehydration that would result from consuming unsafe food and water. Academics have extensively documented the widespread food adulteration during this period, where dishonest vendors mixed cheaper, often toxic, substances into food products, further endangering the health of the poor. The sheer monotony of the diet would also take a mental toll. Imagine eating almost the exact same, limited range of bland, often unappetizing foods, day in and day out, for years on end. Your taste buds, your very desire for food, would be dulled by the lack of variety. Food was simply fuel for labor, not a source of enjoyment or pleasure. This lack of culinary comfort, combined with the physical deprivation, would contribute to a profound sense of emptiness and a constant, low level dissatisfaction. And what about the psychological impact of chronic hunger? It's not just a physical sensation, it's a constant mental distraction. Your mind would be perpetually preoccupied with thoughts of food, with the desperate hope for another meal, another morsel. This fixation on survival would override any capacity for learning, for play, or for genuine childhood curiosity. It would breed a deep seated anxiety about scarcity, fear that the next meal might not come, instilling a survival instinct that would endure long after the immediate hunger had passed. Furthermore, malnutrition had profound and visible physical consequences. Children would suffer from stunted growth, their bodies failing to develop properly due to lack of nutrients. Rickets, a disease caused by vitamin D deficiency, was common, leading to bowed legs, curved spines, and other skeletal deformities that left children permanently crippled. Anemia, caused by iron deficiency, led to extreme fatigue, weakness, and pale complexions, making children even more vulnerable to disease. The vibrant, energetic spirit of childhood was literally starved out of them, leaving them frail, sickly, and prematurely aged. Their bodies, starved of essential building blocks, became living testaments to the harsh realities of their diets. The lack of access to fresh, clean food and safe water also made children incredibly susceptible to epidemics. Cholera, typhoid, and dysentery swept through the overcrowded, unsanitary cities, often claiming the lives of the malnourished and weakened children first. A strong immune system, which relies on proper nutrition, was a luxury these children simply couldn't afford. They lived in a constant state of biological vulnerability, their bodies too depleted to fight off the relentless onslaught of disease. This was a silent killer, claiming lives not with sudden violence, but with a slow, agonizing decline, exacerbated by the very food and water they consumed to survive. Finally, consider the emotional deprivation associated with food. For most children, meals are a time for family, for comfort, for sharing. For Victorian child workers, meals were often solitary, hurried affairs, tinged with anxiety about when the next one would come. There was no joy in eating, no sense of security or abundance. Food was a grim necessity, a reminder of their struggle, and a constant symbol of their poverty. This profound lack of nurturing around such a fundamental human act would leave deep emotional scars, reinforcing their sense of isolation and their understanding that even basic comfort was a privilege they rarely experienced. The stories we tell of Victorian prosperity often omit the millions of hollow, aching stomach that powered its rise, a haunting reminder that progress often came at the most brutal human cost. Last night, we explored the constant, gnawing hunger and inadequate diets that define the waking lives of Victorian child workers. Tonight, let's confront an even more insidious and pervasive threat: the constant assault of sickness, disease, and injury that ravaged their fragile bodies, often leading to disfigurement, chronic pain, or an early grave. Because while you might fear a single catastrophic accident, the truth was a slow, agonizing decay, often invisible to the casual observer. You're a child worker, your body already weakened by malnutrition and exhaustion, living in an environment that is a breeding ground for every imaginable ailment. Consider your living conditions: overcrowded tenements, where multiple families might share a single room. Sanitation is practically non existent. There are no proper toilets, often just shared privies or communal cesspits, overflowing and attracting swarms of flies. Clean water is a luxury. You might drink from a shared pump, itself contaminated, or from polluted rivers. Imagine the sheer volume of bacteria, viruses, and parasites thriving in such conditions, constantly assaulting your developing immune system. Diseases that are rare or easily treated today were rampant and often fatal. Cholera, typhoid, and dysentery swept through cities like wildfire, particularly in the hot summer months. These waterborne illnesses caused severe dehydration and often led to death, especially among children whose bodies were already weakened. Imagine experiencing debilitating diarrhea and vomiting for days without access to clean water, rehydration salts, or medical care. Your small body would rapidly waste away, succumbing to the relentless assault. This wasn't a rare occurrence. These epidemics were a predictable, terrifying part of urban Victorian life, claiming lives indiscriminately. Beyond the immediate epidemics, respiratory illnesses were a constant companion. The air in industrial cities was thick with coal smoke, industrial fumes, and various forms of dust: cotton dust in mills, coal dust in mines. Every breath was an assault on your lungs. Chronic bronchitis and asthma were common, leading to persistent coughing, wheezing, and shortness of breath. Tuberculosis, consumption as it was often called, was a silent, insidious killer. This bacterial infection slowly ate away at your lungs, leaving you weak, feverish, and coughing up blood. Imagine trying to work long hours with lungs that were literally failing, your body racked by a persistent, debilitating cough. This slow suffocation was a common end for many child workers, a chilling testament to the toxic air they were forced to breathe from birth. And then there were the injuries not just from the dangerous machinery, but from the sheer physical demands and neglect. In factories, missing fingers, crushed limbs, and severe lacerations were daily occurrences. A child, exhausted and inattentive, could easily slip into unguarded machinery. Imagine the agony of a limb caught in a spinning field, or fingers severed by a loom. There was no immediate medical attention, no sterile operating rooms. A fellow worker might hastily apply a dirty bandage, or a local surgeon might perform a gruesome amputation, usually without anesthetic and with unsterilized tools. Infection leading to gangrene and often death was almost inevitable. These injuries didn't just cause pain. They left children permanently disfigured and disabled, making it even harder for them to find work or support themselves. In the mines, the dangers were equally stark. Crushed bones from cave-ins, burns from gas explosions, and severe cuts from falling rocks were common. The damp, dark environment meant that even minor cuts could become infected, leading to debilitating conditions or death. For the hurriers and thrusters pulling coal carts, skeletal deformities were almost universal: bowed legs, curved spines, and hunched shoulders were the lasting legacy of hours spent crawling and pushing in cramped, low tunnels. These were not just aches, they were permanent changes to their very bone structure, causing chronic pain and impacting their mobility for life. Historians widely acknowledge that occupational deformities were a defining characteristic of Victorian child labor. Even in domestic service, while less prone to industrial accidents, children faced injuries from falls, burns from open fires, and scalds from hot water. The constant physical exertion, the heavy lifting, and the endless scrubbing would lead to chronic back pain, joint issues, and strained muscles in their developing bodies. These were the invisible injuries, the cumulative toll of relentless labor that slowly eroded their physical well being. And, beyond the dramatic injuries, consider the constant low level ailments that plagued them: chronic fatigue, headaches, toothaches, persistent skin infections, and lice infestations were simply a part of daily life. Imagine enduring a constant headache or a throbbing toothache for days, weeks, or even months with no relief. Your body was in a perpetual state of discomfort, a relentless reminder of the harshness of your existence. This constant pain and illness would wear down your spirit, making it incredibly difficult to find any joy or comfort. Academics still discuss the pervasive impact of chronic, untreated pain on the psychological state of Victorian labourers. The lack of access to medical care was perhaps the cruelest blow. For most child workers, a doctor was an unattainable luxury. If you fell ill or were injured, your only hope was often a family member's crude home remedy, or perhaps, if you were incredibly lucky, a local charity dispensary. But these were often overwhelmed and provided only the most basic, often ineffective treatments. The workhouse, the ultimate fate for many who became too sick or injured to work, offered a bare existence but little in the way of real medical care. You were left to suffer, often alone, your young life slowly draining away, a silent casualty of an indifferent society. This constant vulnerability to sickness, disease, and injury meant that childhood, for these children, was not a time of growth and discovery, but a grim race against time. Their bodies, pushed beyond their limits, exposed to every conceivable hazard, were destined for a truncated, painful existence. The disturbing reality of Victorian child labor is perhaps most vividly seen not in the grand factories or deep mines, but in the pervasive, unceasing suffering etched onto the frail bodies of its youngest victims. A silent scream of pain that echoes through history. Last night, we faced the grim reality of sickness, disease, and injury that constantly threatened the lives of Victorian child workers. Tonight, let's explore perhaps the most tragic loss of all, the stolen childhood itself, the systematic deprivation of play, education, and the very essence of what it means to be a child. Because while their physical suffering was immense, the quiet erosion of their innocence left an indelible, invisible scar. You're a child, but you don't know what it means to be one. From your earliest memories, your world has been defined by labor, by the relentless demands of survival. There are no toys, no dolls, no brightly colored picture books. Your only possessions might be the ragged clothes on your back and the tools of your trade: a broom, a tray of matches, a coal pick, play. The spontaneous, joyful exploration that is so vital for development is a luxury you can't afford. There's no time, no energy, and no safe space for it. Imagine the profound silence where laughter and childish shouts should be, replaced instead by the drone of machinery or the harsh commands of a foreman. Consider the complete absence of formal education. For most child workers, a classroom was an alien concept. Every waking hour was dedicated to earning enough to survive or contribute to the family's meager income. There were no lessons in reading, writing, or arithmetic. Your education came from the harsh realities of the factory floor, the unforgiving depths of the mine, or the brutal lessons of the street. You learned to distinguish good coal from bad, to tie a broken thread, to spot a potential customer, or to avoid a dangerous overseer. These were skills for survival, not for intellectual growth. Your mind, like your body, was stunted, denied the nourishment of knowledge and the stimulation of curiosity. This intellectual deprivation meant that escape from the cycle of poverty was incredibly difficult, if not impossible. You were trapped by circumstance. Your potential for a different life suffocated before it could even begin. Historians agree that limited literacy profoundly restricted upward mobility for these children. And what about family life? While many children work to support their families, the intense demands of their labor often meant that genuine family connection was severely strained. Parents, themselves exhausted by their own toil, had little time or energy for nurturing, for bedtime stories, or for shared moments of joy. Meals were hurried, silent affairs. Evenings, if you weren't working late, were spent in a stupor of exhaustion. For orphans or those sent into domestic service, the sense of family was entirely absent, replaced by the impersonal, often cold, relationships with employers or fellow, equally miserable child workers. This profound lack of parental guidance and emotional support left a gaping hole in their young lives. The premature aging was striking. Look at photographs of Victorian child workers, and you'll see faces etched with a weariness that belies their tender years. Their eyes are old, hollow, reflecting a lifetime of hardship compressed into a mere decade. Their bodies are small, often deformed, and their movements slow and deliberate, lacking the boundless energy of healthy children. They were adults in miniature, burdened by responsibilities far beyond their capacity. Their innocence stripped away, piece by the relentless demands of the industrial world. They never had the chance to dream, to imagine a future beyond their current misery. Think about the lack of hope. When every day is a struggle for survival, when your future promises only more of the same, hope becomes a fragile, distant concept. There are no aspirational role models, no stories of upward mobility to inspire you. Your world is incredibly small, bounded by the factory walls, the mine shaft, or the grimy streets. The idea of a better life, of escaping your circumstances, would seem an impossible fantasy. This pervasive sense of hopelessness, this crushing weight of predetermined fate, would steal not just their present, but their future. Even the concept of personal identity was blurred. You weren't a unique individual with dreams and aspirations. You were a nameless cog in a vast machine, a statistic in the industrial output. Your individuality was suppressed, your voice unheard, your suffering invisible to the powerful. This dehumanization, this stripping away of their inherent worth, meant that millions of children lived and died as mere laborers, their personal stories lost to the relentless march of progress. Academics have worked to recover these lost narratives, giving voice to the voiceless, and the moments of joy or laughter were incredibly rare. If they came, they were fleeting, snatched moments of camaraderie with another child worker, a shared secret, a brief respite from the ever present harshness. But these moments were fragile, easily extinguished by a foreman's shout, a sudden accident, or the gnawing pangs of hunger. Childhood is meant to be a time of unbridled joy, of discovery and wonder. For these children, it was a grim, silent march, punctuated only by pain, exhaustion, and the occasional flicker of desperate defiance. Finally, reflect on the lasting psychological scars. Even for those who survived into adulthood, the experiences of child labor left an indelible mark. Chronic anxiety, depression, a profound sense of injustice, and a lifetime of physical pain would be their constant companions. They might struggle to form healthy relationships, to trust others, or to envision a future free from hardship. The stolen childhood wasn't just a period of time, it was a fundamental alteration of their very being, shaping their perspectives, their fears, and their resilience in ways that modern society can barely comprehend. The cheerful, idealized image of a Victorian childhood, often seen in illustrations and stories, masks the tragic reality of millions whose innocence was systematically sacrificed on the altar of industrial progress, leaving behind a haunting legacy of lost laughter and shattered dreams. Last night, we mourned the profound loss of childhood itself for Victorian child workers, the systematic stripping away of play and education. Tonight, let's explore the crucial, albeit often insufficient, counter narrative, the early stirrings of reform, the desperate fight for change, and the slow, agonizing crawl towards recognition that their plight was a societal evil, not a natural order. Because while their suffering was immense, a glimmer of hope, however faint, eventually began to pierce the industrial gloom. You imagine a world completely indifferent to their suffering, and for a long time, it largely was. The prevailing mindset, fueled by classical economic theories and a harsh interpretation of social Darwinism, argued that child labor was necessary for industrial progress, or even a way to instill discipline and prevent idleness among the poor. Children were seen as miniature adults, their small hands and bodies ideally suited for certain tasks. But slowly, voices began to rise above the din of the factories and the silence of the mines, challenging this brutal status quo. Consider the role of social reformers and philanthropists, individuals like Lord Shaftesbury in Britain, or later, figures like Lewis Hine in America, dedicated their lives to exposing the horrors of child labor. They weren't powerful politicians at first, but driven individuals who witnessed the suffering firsthand and felt compelled to act. They collected testimonies, documented conditions, and tirelessly campaigned for change. Imagine the courage it took to stand against the powerful industrial elite, to speak for the voiceless, and to challenge deeply entrenched economic interests. These early advocates were often met with resistance, ridicule, and even threats. Yet they persisted, driven by a moral conviction that the exploitation of children was a stain on society. Then came the parliamentary inquiries and government commissions. While often slow and bureaucratic, these investigations played a crucial role in gathering official data and bringing the grim realities of child labor into the public consciousness. Committees would interview child workers, factory owners, and medical professionals, meticulously documenting the hours, the conditions, and the devastating impact on children's health. Imagine a small, terrified child, perhaps only 8 years old, being questioned by stern-faced men in suits, trying to articulate the horrors of their daily existence. Their testimonies, often heartbreaking in their simplicity, slowly built a compelling case for intervention, pushing society to confront the uncomfortable truths it had long ignored. Historians credit these official reports with providing irrefutable evidence that spurred the initial legislative actions. The Factory Acts in Britain, beginning in the early 19th century and gradually expanding, represent the first, albeit hesitant, steps towards reform. Initially, these acts were incredibly limited. An early act might prohibit children under a certain age from working in textile mills or limit their hours to 12 a day. Imagine the outrage from factory owners who argued that such restrictions would ruin their businesses and undermine the very fabric of industry. Enforcement was often weak, riddled with loopholes, and inspectors were few and far between. Children might be hidden when inspectors visited, or coached to lie about their age and hours. It was a slow, frustrating battle, where every small gain was met with fierce resistance, and every loophole was quickly exploited. However, these early acts, despite their limitations, were groundbreaking. They established the principle that the state had a right, even a duty, to intervene in the working conditions of children. They set precedents, however imperfect, and paved the way for future, stronger legislation. Think of them as tiny cracks in an immense, unyielding wall, allowing just a sliver of light to enter. Each subsequent act chipped away at the problem, gradually raising the minimum age, reducing working hours, and improving safety standards. The fight was incremental, often taking decades to achieve what we now consider basic protections. Academics still debate the true effectiveness of early factory legislation, often highlighting their limited scope and enforcement challenges. The role of public awareness and media also began to grow. Journalists, writers, and artists like Charles Dickens and later Jacob Riis in America used their platforms to shed light on the appalling conditions. Their vivid descriptions and powerful photographs brought the suffering of child workers into the homes of the middle and upper classes, making it harder for society to turn a blind eye. Imagine seeing a harrowing image of a child in a mine or reading a stark account of a factory accident, knowing that these were not fictional tales, but grim realities. This emotional appeal, coupled with factual reporting, helped to galvanize public opinion and create a moral imperative for change. Yet, even with these efforts, progress was agonizingly slow. The deep-seated poverty that forced families to send their children to work remained a formidable obstacle. For many parents, the meager wages a child earned meant the difference between starvation and survival for the entire family. It was a brutal choice, born of desperation. This economic reality meant that even well-intentioned reforms often faced resistance not just from employers, but from the very families they sought to protect, who feared losing vital income. The reformers had to address not just the exploitation, but the systemic poverty that underpinned it. The challenges were compounded by the lack of a unified, powerful labor movement in the early days. Trade unions were still nascent, often illegal, and rarely focused on the specific plight of children. The adult working class, themselves struggling for rights and better conditions, often saw child labor as competition or simply a necessary part of the industrial system. It took time for a broader social conscience to develop, for the idea of childhood as a protected phase to take root, and for the collective will to demand comprehensive change. The fight for children's rights was often waged by a passionate few against the inertia of an entire society. Finally, consider the resilience of the children themselves. Despite the horrific conditions, the stolen innocence, and the relentless suffering many endured, their survival against such overwhelming odds is a testament to the indomitable human spirit. They found small moments of joy, forged fleeting friendships, and developed an incredible capacity for endurance. While the system was designed to crush them, many found ways to resist, to adapt, and to carry the weight of their experiences into their adult lives, often becoming advocates for change themselves. The story of Victorian child labor is not just one of disturbing exploitation, but also one of persistent struggle, quiet heroism, and the slow, painstaking birth of a social conscience that eventually, imperfectly, began to protect the most vulnerable among us, forever changing the trajectory of childhood itself. Last night, we bore witness to the slow, painstaking birth of reform, the valiant efforts of those who fought to bring light to the dark corners of child labor. Tonight, as our journey through the disturbing daily life of the Victorian child worker comes to a close, let's reflect on the lasting echoes of their suffering, the profound legacy they left behind, and the enduring lessons their brutal experiences offer to us, nestled in our modern comforts. Because while their era may have passed, their quiet sacrifices paved the way for the childhoods we know today. You've walked with them through the pre-dawn cold, felt the grime of the streets, heard the roar of the factory, and smelled the damp earth of the mines. You've imagined their gnawing hunger and the pervasive aches that racked their young bodies. These weren't just statistics, they were millions of individual lives, each a testament to unimaginable hardship. Their suffering, however, was not entirely in vain. The very act of documenting their plight, of pushing for those early imperfect factory acts, ignited a slow burning fire of social consciousness. It forced society to look in the mirror and confront the uncomfortable truth that unchecked industrial progress came at an unbearable human cost, especially for its most vulnerable. The slow, arduous fight for child protection laws continued for decades, fueled by the memory of these forgotten children. Each incremental step raising the minimum working age, reducing hours, mandating basic education, improving safety standards was a direct response to the horrors witnessed during the Victorian era. Think of every child labor law, every school attendance requirement, every child safety regulation we have today. They are not just abstract legal frameworks. They are direct descendants of the battles fought on behalf of those pale, exhausted children who once toiled in the mills and mines. Their quiet suffering became a powerful catalyst for a societal shift, a recognition that childhood was a sacred period, not merely an economic resource. Yet, the legacy of the Victorian child worker isn't just about legislative change. It's also about a profound shift in our understanding of childhood itself. Before the widespread awareness of child labor's abuses, children were often viewed as miniature adults, capable of adult labor and subject to adult responsibilities. The concept of a protected, nurtured childhood, dedicated to play, learning, and emotional development, was a relatively new idea. The stark realities of child labor forced society to re-evaluate this perspective, eventually leading to the modern understanding of childhood as a distinct and vulnerable phase of life requiring special protection. This shift in cultural norms, arguably one of the most significant social transformations, owes an immeasurable debt to the suffering endured by those young workers. Even today, the echoes of their struggle can be found. When you hear debates about ethical manufacturing, about fair labor practices, about the conditions in sweatshops in distant lands, you are hearing the reverberations of those same arguments that began in the Victorian era. The fight against child labor is not over globally, and the lessons from the past serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of prioritizing profit over human dignity. The images of those small, tired faces compel us to remain vigilant, to continue advocating for the rights of children everywhere, to ensure that no child today faces the same desperate choices as their Victorian counterparts. And perhaps, on a more personal level, their story offers a profound lesson in gratitude and perspective. As you lie in your warm, comfortable bed tonight, consider the vast distance between your reality and theirs. The clean air you breathe, the nutritious food you eat, the safe environment in which you sleep, the education you received, the very freedom to choose your path. These are privileges that millions of children before you could only dream of. Their suffering, though disturbing, serves as a powerful reminder of the progress humanity has made and the fragility of those hard-won rights as the noise of the old Victorian factories fades into the mists of history and the distant clatter of coal carts falls silent. We are left with a quiet reverence for the lives that were so unjustly lived. The small, often nameless, hands that built an empire. The young bodies that fueled an industrial revolution. They whisper a timeless truth that true progress is measured not just in economic might, but in the compassion and care we extend to our most vulnerable. Their disturbing daily life was a chapter of profound hardship, but also a catalyst for profound change, a haunting lullaby that calls us to remember and to protect.